Right then, gang. This is going to be the start of a new series. This is going to be kind of mistakes I've made or lessons I've learned. I suppose mistakes I've made and lessons I've learned from that, and how I'm going to change things going forward. I'm going to do this as maybe like a weekly, bi-weekly vlog. It's going to be way more conversational than some of our other videos and some of the more structured content and educational stuff we do. This is just going to be thinking about like what I've changed my opinion on, or basically what's happened in my life over the past couple of weeks or that week that's made me now readjust my thought process and change how I'm going to do things going forward. So when you first get into training, and this one's going to be about basically the relationship between frequency, volume, and intensity, and kind of how that all works from a muscle building perspective. I'll do like an in-depth educational video on this, but this is just more of a conversational one because it's something that's on my mind right now. It's something I've realized recently, and like I've put the pieces together finally. So when it comes down to training and when it comes down to trying to build muscle, the most important thing is that we like when we're trying to build muscle that we're getting heavier and we're getting stronger within the gym. To some degree, we want to be training close to failure, and what that means is you want to be taking your reps like pretty much till you cannot do another rep. Now, you don't necessarily want to go to failure, being you don't want to necessarily fail on a rep. You don't have to do that, and you don't really want to be like loads of reps in reserve. We save that type of stuff and that type of training for like more powerlifting approach, or when someone's more sport specific, and we want to try and like make sure that we don't affect any of their performance within the gym or within their sport. So you would use RIR and stuff like that. But when it comes to intensity, volume, and frequency, it was always confusing to me as to why some people would say to have such low volume within their sessions, and why the like high intensity camp kind of would go on about you only need to do 1 or 2 sets per exercise, and even only up to like 4 sets per muscle group per session. And this would depend upon the type of session you're doing, because if you are doing a full body session or any type of session really, the total amount of sets you're going to end up doing throughout that session alone will probably be somewhere between like 14 to 20 like total sets across that session, and that could be quite a lot of actual sets. And if you're doing 1 to 2 sets per exercise, obviously that's going to be quite a lot of exercises depending on like what training day you're on, whether you're on an upper or full body or whatever you're doing. So let's think about it from the way that we first need to understand it, and that is like volume for building muscle. So volume for building muscle, they reckon somewhere between 5 to 9 sets or 4 to 8 sets, but 5 to 9 builds like 80% of your muscle. In which case, it would mean that like to get the majority or the most out of building muscle, it would be somewhere between 12 to 20 on like a maximal scale. But that's per muscle group per week. That isn't per session or anything like that. That's just per muscle group per week. To understand the frequency aspect and why frequency makes a difference in training, and frequency being the amount of times you hit the same muscle group, the frequency side of it is basically we want to try and spike muscle protein synthesis again. Muscle protein synthesis is the signal for building muscle. So if we can spike that as often as possible, we're going to start to build muscle. And basically, muscle protein synthesis spikes after 2 to 5 hours. It then depletes or goes back to baseline, after about 24 to 48 hours. Meaning we probably want to spike it again, which is why a lot of the studies will say like 2 times a week minimum is best for building muscle. And this is why when you do like a full body split, you're actually spiking it 3 times a week. And this is why like I've followed loads of different people like Trained by JP, but even like Mind Pump came out with like full body and they were like, this is the best training style. And like I couldn't get my head around why, because I was like the volume like across the session per muscle group doesn't feel like that's enough. It doesn't feel like it's a lot. This 12 to 20 sets we're supposed to be hitting. And then I would look at like the session breakdown and be like, but I'm not feeling a pump. I don't like the feeling of this. Well, it's actually they're taking advantage of that muscle protein synthesis spike and they're actually stimulating it multiple times per week, which is why like when it comes down to then the amount of like volume like per muscle group per session would depend upon the frequency that you are doing. Because you'll hear people say, well, if you are going to train that same muscle group again, you can't go as hard or you can't go as intense or you can't use as much volume. So volume being sets, if you just think of volume as sets and intensity as the weight you're using, or like the way some people think about it is how intense you are working, so how close to failure you are getting. Either of those are kind of interchangeable to a certain degree with this, because the heavier you go within the rep range you're trying to hit, the closer you're going to get to failure within that rep range, so on and so forth. So it'll be quite an intense set if you're using an appropriate load and going close to failure. So when you're looking at things like trying to spread your volume out over a week, it would be a case of trying to figure out your training split first. If you figure out your training split and the amount of times you're going to hit that muscle within a week, then you can start to divvy out the sets like over that week. And again, if something between like 5 to 9 builds 80% of your muscle or something like that, then it would be a good idea for us to go like, right, we could start around 8 sets per muscle group, like over the week. Or even if you just go like, right, we're going to get 100% of muscle growth based upon studies. It's like, right, we're going to get 12 sets. And you just got to spread it out across the week. The amount of actual sets you do per exercise per session would purely depend upon the amount of times you're going to be hitting that muscle group. So if I'm going to hit that muscle group twice within a week, then it's 6 sets per session. If I'm going to be hitting that muscle group 3 times per week, then it's 4 sets per session. And that's what starts to now make sense to me, is when you look at the high intensity approach and you look at someone who's going to be using low volume but like high loads, high intensity, and going, you don't need that much volume. If you look out over the week, it's probably equated to around 12 sets, which just blew my mind, because it's just like, well, actually, you're right. You don't need that much volume per session. And you're right. If you did more volume, you wouldn't be able to perform exactly the same the next session. And this is starting to make way more sense to me now going forward. And this is why different training splits seem to do better than others, because you're taking like advantage of that muscle protein synthesis spike, hitting that muscle group twice a week. So what does that mean for me in my training going forward? Well, I've changed to a push-pull leg split, and I've also changed it so I basically have 5 sessions a week. So I end up hitting like the same muscle group twice within a week. Sometimes it will be on, then within an 8-day period, I hit every muscle group basically, because I have 2 rest days. I train Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday rest, Friday, Saturday I train, Sunday rest, and then train again on the Monday. That's all of the 6 sessions that I have programmed done. That should be enough, because if you think about it from my perspective, is like I'm still spiking muscle protein synthesis reasonably regularly. Now I could go to an upper lower split and spike it more. I just haven't brought myself to be able to do that yet. I don't like it. I like the push-pull splits. I like this way of training. So I'm probably just going to carry on with this, but like it might change the way that you decide to do your programming and the way that you decide to do your training. It now starts to make sense as to why there's the arguments and what people are actually meaning by saying you can't go as intense if you're going to do full body and you're going to hit that same muscle group again in 2 days' time. And it's like you can go as intense, you can use as heavy weight, but the volume and intensity has to kind of play around. If volume's higher, the amount of like heavy loads you'll be able to lift will have to come down. Whereas if you're lifting heavy and going to failure and like pushing as hard as you can, the total volume has to come down. If you keep both high, what's going to happen is the actual recovery demands will be too much, meaning you won't be able to recover for your next session, meaning you'll be too knackered, too dead going into it, and you just won't be able to get the results. So you won't be able to produce the thing we're after, which is to get stronger each session, which will result again on getting bigger. So that's something that I've realized is something that I'm going to be changing about my training going forward. Again, I've already changed to a push-pull leg split, but it's just quite interesting to see why people are changing, or why people have said this for the longest time, and how confusing it can be for a lot of people. And it is just something that for me, I never really truly understood. I didn't really get it. And I think this is where it comes down to like application and applying it to yourself and trying to actually understand the mechanisms that drive muscle growth underneath it. Like before I knew what muscle protein synthesis was, but I didn't realize that it's actually the building of muscle tissue, and the muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdowns happening at the same time. So we just want to be kind of promoting muscle protein synthesis. We want to promote building of muscle, and we do that through training, through the stimulus. And it is a systemic effect, but it's more of a localized effect as well. So if I train my quads, I'm going to spike muscle protein synthesis in my quads. There again is some local effect. You'll see people like, and they've done studies where I would do like leg extension on my right leg and nothing on my left leg, but my left leg still gets hypertrophy, and that's because there is that systemic kind of effect going on. But because it's local, that's why we want to stimulate it more often and more frequently throughout the week. That being said, if you're not going to be stimulating it that much throughout the week, just make sure that, again, the sets are equated across the week. So don't necessarily think that you have to do upper, lower, or full body split now. You can continue to do your push, pull, leg split, or whatever split you're doing. You just need to make sure that the volume that you're trying to hit is allowing for the amount of recovery you're going to get, and allowing for the total sessions across the week. So that meaning that because I'm doing push, pull, legs, rest, and then push, pull, legs again, the gap between my first push session and my second push session is like 3 days as such. Meaning that the volume on that push session can be higher than if I was hitting it in 2 days' time or 3 days' time. So the volume's higher because of that reason, because I can recover from it. Now, again, like in my push session, I probably got like 8 sets to my chest. So it's still not tons. And then I hit push again, and I probably have another maybe like 6 to 8 on that second session. So for me, like, I'm around that 16 set per week mark, and that's probably about the limit. And that's what, again, this is part of the learning process, right? We adjust things, we change things, and that's part of the things that I want to start documenting with this series is what am I changing? Not just about my training, just my life in general, as I learn new things, as I understand things a bit better, business, like my lifestyle, my mental health, like all of it. It's going to go into these little kind of videos. They're going to be very, very different to the normal ones, the kind of higher production ones. And these are just going to be a bit more like candid, a bit more just chatty as we're doing now. If you did like that, watch some of the other videos, drop me a subscribe, that would be grand. I would really appreciate that, or sharing this to anyone who is struggling to understand the relationship between like intensity, frequency, and volume, because that's something that's clicked for me. Again, I might be wrong, and if I am, please correct me, but that's the understanding that I'm currently at this current moment. So thank you for watching. My name's Charlie. This is Hat the Body, Hat the Mind. We will see you on the next one.